In the late summer of 1953, at the end of the Korean War, a small band of American prisoners emerged from the darkness of communist North Korea, carrying a 3-foot-tall crucifix carved out of firewood by a Jewish POW, his crown of thorns made from discarded telephone cables. They called it Christ in Barbed Wire, and it was in honor of their chaplain, Father Emil Kapaun. We only have 2 surviving records of Father Kapaun preaching a homily, but that's not what's important. Gregory the Great said, it matters greatly not only what kind of preachers they are, but also what way, what method they preach. Sometimes eloquence is not measured in words, but in actions, not in turns of phrase, but in encounter. Sometimes a preacher doesn't preach with words, but with tenderness, with a willingness to take on the smell of his sheep, to show the way of beauty, to show the way of Christ.
When most of us were down on our backs and a siege of dysentery swept the area, our benevolent padre would go out into the sub-zero temperature at 5:30, searching for small twigs and pieces of wood to build a fire and carry water to fill the pans he diligently made of old pieces of sheet iron, and then remove dirty trousers from the men who no longer could control their natural functions. After boiling this clothing and getting it dry, he would dress the pathetic hulks of skin and bones. The faint heart would become a little more audible, a spark of life lit up in their hollow eyes, and the death stare would vanish as the corner of their mouths would turn up and a smile would appear on their tortured faces.
In Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis writes, Jesus wants us to touch human misery, to touch the suffering flesh of others, to enter into the reality of other people's lives and know the power of tenderness. Whenever we do so, our lives become wonderfully complicated and experience intensely what it is to be a people. Preaching is an event. An event has a number of elements. It's something unforeseen. It fills us with wonder. It points us toward a mystery, and by doing so, reveals it so that what is true is made manifest. And most importantly, it surprises us. Father Kapaun entered into the absolute wretchedness of life in the prisoner of war camp. When he was confronted with the soiled trousers of sick POWs, he didn't flinch. When he helped to dress the men, he didn't draw back in disgust. For St. John Eudes, eloquence is found in security and warmth, like a mother speaking the words the child needs to hear. For St. John and his deep devotion to the Immaculate Heart, this maternal image is key. He says that preaching emanated from the bosom of God, and through it, he speaks to mankind. When we're in the bosom of God, we are safe and we are secure. The dangers of the world have no power over us. When the Church preaches as a mother, we feel the same way. Perhaps the most surprising thing about Father Kapaun's tender action is that it shows us the maternal care of God the Father, and that we must approach our preaching in exactly the same way.
Father Kapaun always talked in language the men understood. He knew their problems, and his advice was always best for all individuals or groups concerned. He visited the sick in hospital, the places where the men went, football games, basketball games, etc. His only interest was serving God and his fellow men.
Pope Francis writes, an evangelizing community gets involved by word and by deed in people's daily lives. It bridges distances. It is willing to abase itself if necessary, and it embraces human life. Touching the suffering flesh of Christ in others, evangelizers thus take on the smell of the sheep. Pope Francis says that dialogue is preaching's first step. And Francis de Sales says that preaching is an act of love. It's heart speaking to heart, soul speaking to soul. In a similar way, Alphonsus Liguori says that preachers have a special mission to heal through darts of love and strokes of fire. Dialogue is an experience of the other. It is an act of love. It is a mutual indwelling of one in the other. It is an act of communion. Francis de Sales also said, the supreme art is to have no art. That's to say, the greatest preaching is to dialogue without artifice. Love and communion demand authenticity and earnestness. St. John Henry Newman says, earnestness creates earnestness in others by sympathy. And the more a preacher loses and is lost to himself, the more does he gain his brethren. Father Kapaun was earnest and without pretense, entering into the lives of the men, speaking to them in ways they understood, visiting the men where they were, touching the suffering flesh of Christ in the dying POWs. By these acts of love, he entered into their misery and lost himself in the smell of his sheep.
Father Kapaun began to look physically like Christ. His features became more and more ascetic through emaciation, and his long, straggly hair and beard actually changed to a reddish brown. The resemblance was not the produce of any one man's imagination. It was so pronounced that the men kidded him about it. The chaplain would turn away in an agony of embarrassment.
In Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis says, it is not by proselytizing that the church grows, but by attraction. In writing Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis is preoccupied with the fact that people have lost their religious sense, that is, the sense of their own humanity. The religious sense is a disposition towards something greater than ourselves. In every age and culture, humanity has sought beauty. Beauty attracts and awakens something deep in the soul. It moves us out of ourselves and into the sublime. In Father Kapaun's physical transformation, the soldiers were confronted with the image of Christ. Its beauty cannot be denied. The French dramatist Jean Anouilh once said, beauty is one of the few things that does not lead to doubt about God. This is why the Holy Father is so insistent on the via pulchritudinis. When we lose sight of our relationship with that which is greater than us, our way of living becomes a way of dying. Pope Francis says our infinite sadness can only be cured by an infinite love. For a dying world, our preaching is the finest and the best antidote. So often our discussions on homiletics descend into the abstract and conceptual. In Father Kapaun, we have a concrete example of what it is to preach in a way that instructs, delights, and moves, not by the words he spoke, but by the event of his life. In a world consumed by emptiness and consumerism, preaching transcends mere duty. It becomes a matter of life and death. As we conform to Christ as Father Kapaun did, nurturing a profound inner life, our words stop being mere instruction. They become a transformative event. It's a communion of hearts, a dialogue without artifice, and ultimately, the encounter with beauty. Whether in the horrors of war or in the bustling noise of our daily lives, preaching is not just empty words. It's a matter of sharing a radiant light. The power of eloquence is not measured in empty prose, but in the enduring echoes of tenderness, authenticity, and the compelling allure of beauty. We don't preach because it's part of our job. We preach because we must. St. John Eudes, St. Francis de Sales, St. Alphonsus Liguori, St. John Henry Newman, servant of God Emil Kapaun, pray for our preachers.